Hello, good evening to everybody in all over the world. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to take part in this program of Tretyakov Gallery and organized by the Cultural Attaché of Israel in Moscow. Thank you very much for giving us the chance and the possibility to be also involved in this. Chutemas is also in Israel, of course, a very famous and important school, and we are delighted to have this connection with Moscow, with Russia, and with researchers from your country, because we think, and you will see it later in my speech, that there might be a big connection between Chutemas and what happened in Tel Aviv, in the White City. And this connection has not been researched enough until now. And actually we had a plan together with some international researchers to show some aspects of the Chutemas here in Tel Aviv, but unfortunately due to the COVID pandemic, we had to postpone this program and this exhibition, but I'm sure we will do it next year. And so it's really nice and important, and we are glad to be now together with you. Now, we will speak about Tel Aviv, as I told you, and soon you will see what I meant by mentioning Chutemas. The White City in Tel Aviv, the history and the management of the World Heritage Site. That is the topic of our speech. Actually, Tel Aviv is a very young city. It was founded only 111 years ago in 1909. As you can see here, we have a number of people gathering together in the sands next to Jaffa and deciding which family of these people will get which plot to build their house on it. And that is what we call the historical picture of the birth of Tel Aviv. But at the beginning, these buildings actually belonged to the city of Jaffa. That is an old city. It is already mentioned in the Bible, and many people know it today also because of the Jaffa oranges. And that's actually the mother of Tel Aviv. Only in 1921, Tel Aviv got an independent status as a municipality next to the Arab city Jaffa. When the Nazis got to power in Germany in 1933, a lot of Jews escaped from Germany and Middle Europe and came to Palestine, which was in these days British mandate. And now actually we have the second wave of construction in Tel Aviv. At the beginning, in the 1910s and 20s mainly, the buildings have been constructed in what we call the eclectic style, which means that the architects took elements of very different architectural types and merged it together and got what we call the eclectic style. And that was in the 1920s. In the 1930s, when Tel Aviv underwent again a second construction boom, the style the buildings have been constructed was what we call today the Bauhaus style or the international style. And when I speak about a boom in the 1930s, it is of course due to the huge number of new immigrants, of refugees who came from Europe and escaped the Nazis. And on these two pictures, we see actually a contemporary illustration of what happened in the 1930s. On one picture, you see the harbor of Tel Aviv, which is very busy due to the fact that a lot of materials arrived in Tel Aviv through the harbor. And on the second picture, on this collage, we can see how an artist saw the city of Tel Aviv in the 1930s. You see, it is incredible movement here. You see a lot of people in the streets. You can see maybe the people on the seashore. You see, that's actually our topic. In the middle of the picture, you see the Bauhaus building, this rounded building, which is the symbol of this time. Now our next picture shows us the development of the population in Tel Aviv at its beginning. So you can see in 1920, right after, short before the city was declared as an independent municipality, we had only 2,000 inhabitants. Whereas right after the Second World War in 1948, there are already 250,000 inhabitants in Tel Aviv. So you can understand that a lot of buildings had to be constructed for this new population. Now, the architects or the directions of style used in these days can be divided into 4 different sources. So we have one source, the so-called Bauhaus school, but we have also the architect Erich Mendelssohn, who was a very famous architect in Germany in the 1900s, at the beginning of the 20th century, and who also immigrated personally to Palestine and had got some big works here in the country. For example, the house of the president in Rehovot, he constructed, but also the university in Jerusalem on Mount Scopus, for example, the Rambam Hospital in Haifa, and so on. So another important architect in this time was Le Corbusier, originally a Swiss architect, and he went then to France, and he was known all over the world for his invention and his renewal of the modern architect. And a fourth source of inspiration for the architects of Tel Aviv were the architectural schools in Belgium. Now we had the possibility to study the biographies of nearly 80 architects who have been involved in the construction of the white city of Tel Aviv. This data set was researched by the Tel Avivian architect Nitza Smok, and we used the data she published already and tried to establish some statistics for our purpose. Now we were looking, we were comparing the birthdays of these 78 architects. And what did we find? We found that these architects, about more than half of the after 1919. After 1900. That means that when they started to construct the white city of Tel Aviv, half of the architects have been only 30 years old or even younger. So you can imagine such a huge job was done by very, very young architects. So this is probably one of the reasons why the white city of Tel Aviv had such a revolutionary and new nature, because of the fact that nearly more than half of the architects were so young when they were dealing with the construction of this site. Now, the second data we were looking at was the origin. Where did the architects come from? And here also we were actually quite surprised, because we found that more than half of the architects we could study came originally from Ukraine, from Russia, or from Poland. So that's now, of course, what I mentioned at the beginning. We are very much interested in this connection because we see that such a huge impact must be from Eastern Europe coming to the white city of Tel Aviv. And then Of course, there are architects also from other countries, but still the majority originally was born in Russia, Ukraine, and Poland. Now we had an additional data set, and that was the place where these architects made their studies. And here we found out that nearly 1/3 studied in Germany, and then quite a big number in France, then in Belgium, as already mentioned, and only then Ukraine, and so on. So that means that there was a sort of a shift. The architects originally came from Eastern Europe, but they made their studies in Western Europe, and after their studies came to mandatory Palestine and started to work. Now let's go to the White City. I would like to show you what happened and in Tel Aviv and how these buildings look like and what happened during the years. You can see here the Rabinovich building, which is located on Dizengoff Street in the middle of the White City of Tel Aviv. This building, if you look at the black and white building, has typical elements of the local modernism. We can see the balconies, which are, of course, very functional. Modernism is also the school of functionalism, and for this reason, the architects adopted the balcony as a functional space of each apartment, and really every apartment has at least one balcony. And then we have relatively small windows. The windows are small, again, as an adaptation to the local climate, because we have a lot of light. So the rooms would be too shiny, and the architects tried to reduce the bright light by small windows, but also the heat can less come into the rooms when the windows are small. An additional typical element, as you can see in this building, is its asymmetry. So this was really revolutionary to construct an asymmetric building. But now on the second picture, which is in color, you can see that during the years, the buildings were very much suffered a lot and got in worse and worse situation. And so you can see the balconies, which originally had been open, were closed. But not only the balconies, also the part of the windows have been closed, and the plaster is falling down, and so on. So that shows you what happened to these originally very impressive buildings through the 1980s. Here we have another example of a typical modernist building here in Tel Aviv. This building is located on Baухaus Street. Again, we can see as a whole a sort of a futuristic construction with an asymmetric facade. We have, in this case, the round balconies. Again, the balcony was so important, so the architects always added balconies, but in order to be more interesting, they changed each building. So nearly no two buildings are looking the same, because each building has been constructed by another architect for another owner and on a different plot. So we don't have a uniform architectural language, but we have a huge variation of architectural pieces in the white city of Tel Aviv. Okay, so we have seen now a second example of one of these unique buildings here in Tel Aviv. And on the colored picture, unfortunately, we see the situation today. The same building, which was really a wonderful construction, is in a very bad situation. We see this interesting addition at the top of the building we can't see it anymore. It got lost. We see again that the balconies have been closed. We see the very bad situation of the plaster of the building. So you understand that the time was working here, and a lot of changes have been made. Now, you will be maybe a little bit astonished if you see these bad buildings in this situation, but nevertheless, the UNESCO understood that this whole urban tissue of the white city of Tel Aviv is something very precious and special, and it is worthwhile to preserve it. And for this reason, in the year 2003, 17 years ago, UNESCO nominated the white city of Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. You can see here the map of Tel Aviv, and in the middle of the city of Tel Aviv, we have this square, and this is the area of the white city. So that's, of course, not the whole city of Tel Aviv, but just a part of it. And here we can see now this square a little bit nearer. You can see the blue spots. These are buildings in the international style, which are under preservation law. Then we have yellow bands around these blue spot buildings, the concentration of the blue spot buildings. This yellow carpet means this is a buffer zone. That means that new constructions cannot be done more than 8 floors. And then in the south of this map, we see the orange colored points. These are buildings which have been constructed in the eclectic style, which are actually older than the Bauhaus style. The eclectic buildings have been constructed, as I mentioned, through the 1920s. And the modernist or Bauhaus style buildings have been constructed between 1930 and 1948, the year of the establishment of the State of Israel. Now, if we speak about the White City of Tel Aviv, we have actually two topics. We have on one side the architecture, the buildings themselves, but we have also the urban layout of the White City of Tel Aviv. And this urban plan has been done by Sir Patrick Geddes. He was a British urbanist, and he had the idea how this new White City, as we call it today, should be planned. So as you can see on this map, the plan is very easy, basic. We have main streets from north to south. On the left, you can see this white part, that is the sea. So the main streets, they run from north to south. And the idea was that the main streets should concentrate the traffic and the noisy parts of the city. And then we have smaller streets running from west to east, from the sea to the land. And through these smaller streets, the wind coming from the ocean, from the sea, can ventilate the city. So that was the general plan of Geddes. But he had also an additional idea. He said, in this new city, every building should be constructed within a garden. He was influenced by the British idea, or philosophy even, of the garden city. And this idea was also implemented in the urban plan for Tel Aviv by Patrick Geddes. And if we now look at the realization of the Geddes plan, we can see on an aerial picture of today that the Geddes plan still is intact. There were no changes made. The plan, the urban plan of the White City is still existing. Now a description of the White City of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has about 400,000 inhabitants, and 1/4 of them appropriately is living in the White City, in this smaller inner part of the whole city. We think we have about 4,000 buildings which have been constructed in the international style or modernist style or Bauhaus style. We use these words as synonyms. Now, from these 4,000 buildings, about half are under preservation law. That means they are not allowed to be destroyed. And the third description would be the legal status. The huge majority of these buildings belong to private persons. Now, the management plan of the UNESCO for the site says that on one side, the Guedes plan has to be kept, and the second, that the architecture, the buildings themselves, are not allowed to be destructed. Now, what are the most difficult parts of this plan? Actually, number one, that most of these buildings belong to private persons. That makes it very, very difficult to decide and to change the situation. Then we have another problem, that the renovation of buildings which are under preservation law are much more expensive than regular renovations of buildings. And then the third point is, and that's actually also a problem we see probably all over, also in your country, that modernism is not really an architectural style people love. It's much more difficult to fall in love with a modernist building than to fall in love with a Renaissance building or a Baroque palais or a Gothic church or whatever. Now, I would like to show you the idea the municipality of Tel Aviv had in order to improve the cooperation of the house owners to deal with the renovations. The municipality of Tel Aviv said, if somebody is willing to renovate his building, the municipality will give to the house owner additional building rights. That means on the existing Bauhaus building, the owners may add 1, 2, or even 3 floors in order to take a part of the money they earn by selling these additional floors and renovate the building as a whole. We call this a win-win situation because of the fact that neither the municipality nor the owner of the building have to pay for the preservation of the buildings. Now, there are actually 3 different classes of protections. One class is the building or the buildings which belong to class number 1 may not be changed. The class number 2 are buildings which are allowed to have partial additions and floors, And the class number 3 are buildings which get full additions and floors. And now I will explain you what does this mean. Let's say the class number 1. In this case, you will say the renovation does not allow to change the building. So how can the owner still get money for the renovation? And here are 2 examples. One is the building, for example, on Rekanati Street, no, the Rekanati building on Menachem Begin Street. It was constructed in 1935. And again, you see a very unique composition of a building. We have rounded balconies on one facade. We have these small squared balconies on another facade. We have the typical flat roof for the modernist building. And of course, white city, this bright color is also typical for modernism. So this modern construction, which is nearly 90 years old now, it looks as if somebody has planned it today. So that's the timeless style of the Tel Aviv modern city. Now, this building has had 2 floors and a ground floor with shops, as you can see. And it was in the class number 1. The building was protected in a way that it was not allowed to change. But still, in order to get money, there would be a theoretical possibility to add 2 or 3 floors. Now, what did they make? They sold this additional theoretical building rights to the skyscraper, which is now, you can see it in the background. And so the skyscraper could add maybe 1 floor. And with this money they got for this additional floor, the Bauhaus building could be renovated in the best way, as we can see here. Here is another example of a building which belongs to the renovation class number 1. That means it was not allowed to change the building at all after the renovation. So what we see today is how this building looked also in the 1930s. We have an interesting mixture of this rounded first part of the building. Then we have a second part with horizontal windows, and we have a third part at the background with round windows. Again, we have the balconies, typical for modernism, but we have also this small roof running around the facade, dividing the ground floor from the upper floors. And if you look at it, you can understand this small roof has also a function. It gives us some shade. So again, the architects are always searching for functional architecture. So this is a building which has been renovated lately, and it shows us how wonderful these buildings actually are. Now we come to the class number 2. And as I explained before, in class number 2, a realization of the additions on the existing building is possible, not like in class number 1, where the additions have to be sold to another owner. In this case, the additions can be realized. You see, these buildings had 3 floors, and after the renovation, they have 6 floors, but the additional floors are constructed in a setback from the main facade. That means that if you stand in front of the building, you will not feel that you are under a Bauhaus monstrum, but the proposition of the buildings are still, the proportions of the buildings are still the same. If you are before the building, you cannot see the additions because they are in a step back from the main facade. Here we have an example of such a building of class number 2. You see, this building had originally 3 floors. Then there was a 4th floor added on the same level of the facade. And then we have a 5th and a 6th floor added on top of the building, but in a step back. We don't really see these additions. We can see it or more feel it. The architect also decided to change the color of the addition. The addition is white, whereas the main body of the building is in an ochre gray color. And this would be also a building on Brook Street, which had originally 3 floors. And you see again, in a step back, we have the additions of 2 or even 3 more floors. In this case, the renovation architect felt so free to add to the building even a typical, so-called typical Bauhaus element. What do I mean? You see, on the building, we have what we call a pergola. This pergola on the roof is made out of concrete, and it is held by columns. Now, this pergola is very typical for modernist building, but in this case, the original building didn't have it. So you see, that's how today Tel Aviv renovates itself. It is quite a free way in interpreting modernism and reusing elements and ideas of modernism. You can see also the shutters, which are made out of wood. This is also due to the preservation of the building. In the meantime, these shutters were made out of plastic, but because of the fact that the building is under preservation law, they had to implement again, to use again wood as construction material. Now we go to the last group of the preservation, and that are buildings which may be changed much more than the class buildings of number 1 and 2. That means that additions may be continuously added on the existing building, and they may also be in very different ways. So we will look at some examples. Look at this building on Pinsker Street. It has been constructed or planned by the architect Jenny Averbuch in 1936. The building had originally only 2 floors. You can see then the 2 floors are where the balconies are, the handrails of the balconies are made out of concrete without openings. The new floors, they differentiate themselves from the old part of the building only by the handrails of the balconies. You can see the balcony have these small openings, and this tiny element shows us, because we know it, that this part is new. But somebody who passes this building and doesn't know about the history of the building will not recognize probably this difference. And he will say, yeah, that's an international style building of the 1930s. And there are, of course, discussions about the legality of this way of interpretation of preservation. Because in this building, we do not know anymore what is new and what is old. So a lot of critiques are here. But you see, Tel Aviv decided to this way. Now here we have another example. This building has been constructed with originally 3 floors. It is located on Rothschild Avenue, on the corner with Balfour Street. The architect, Mikidovich, originally also from Ukraine, made this building in 1932. Now, the addition after the renovation process is quite obvious. Of course, you can very clearly see what is new and what is old. Interestingly, the renovation or preservation architect, he kept the original angle of the building. So he didn't change the shape of the building. He changed the material. He chose glass and metal, iron. So here we can see very clearly what is new and what is old. And a third example on Nevi'im Street, would be this building, which had also originally 3 floors. But now we see absolutely clear what is new. The addition is made, first of all, again, of different materials. We have glass, we have iron, we have even wood, which is very untypical for Tel Aviv and for modernism also. But the third point is also the shape of the addition is absolutely new. The preservation architect, he changed the typical right angles of modernism into this rounded roof on top of the renovated building. So you will ask maybe how does the municipality decide which building belongs to which classification group? So there are some, this is not science, natural science, but there are some criteria. One is the architectural value of the building. That means how special is the construction. Is there a new idea, a new spirit in this special building? Then where the building is located. That means if you see the building from all over, so it is more important to preserve it as a local landmark. And the third would be maybe the architect is, if he was an important architect, so it will help also to preserve his work. Now, what can the municipality do? As I told you before, most of these buildings are in private hands, and the municipality just can formulate laws, but still the owners are free if they decide to preserve the building or if they prefer not to do it. Now, the municipality by itself can show good examples on public in public space, and this was, for example, done with the famous Dizengoff Circle. The Dizengoff Circle was already mentioned within the Guedes plan. We spoke about it before. The Guedes plan was the plan for the White City, and Guedes already located a public area. He didn't call it Dizengoff Square, of course, but he said that White City should have such an open space. And in the 30s, there was the idea to ask different architects for proposals for the design of this open space. And the space was designed at the end according to the plans of a woman architect, and that's again interesting. She was very young. It was a woman, originally also from Eastern Europe. Jenny Averbuch was her name. So that again shows us the revolutionary spirit of Tel Aviv in the 1930s. And the idea of Averbuch was to construct a round public space with 6 streets running into this space, but the buildings should be constructed uniform. That means that all the buildings, the facades of the buildings, should look the same. And not only that they are the same, but she also gave already the design of the buildings. And that meant that, as we can see on the picture, the horizontal balconies are the significant parts of the buildings. So the design was already done, although each building at the end has been constructed by a different architect, but he could not change the way the facades of the buildings should look. Now, as you can see on the picture, the Dizengoff circle was very popular in the 1930s. People loved this place. They come, they gathered here. There were a lot of coffee shops. People met one the other, and children were playing here. So it was an urban high life point. Now, in the 1960s and 70s, there was more and more traffic, and people could not cross the street anymore of this open space, and one decided to build a bridge. And if we are looking now at this bridge from an aerial view, it looks very logical and convincing, and we think, yeah, no problem. They solved the traffic situation in an elegant way. The street runs under the open space. But if we now look at the reality from the ground level, we can see that this bridge was a very bad construction because it disturbed the open space. The idea of a public square went lost. We cannot feel anymore that we are on a public area due to the height of this bridge. We don't see anymore the buildings around, and we don't get a feeling that we can meet here somebody and so on. So for this reason, people didn't like anymore the Dizengoff circle and stopped to come. And it was very neglected through dozens of years. And people asked the municipality to destroy this terrible bridge. And only in 2017, now it's nearly 3 years ago, still, you see the municipality was ready to destroy this construction. And here we see the plan which was done. That means the original situation was re-established in its plans. And here we see also after the renovation, it's now a little bit more than a year, that the situation of the original Dizengoff circle is reborn. So again, people come to this circle, and if you would come for a visit, for example, you will see now that it's again very much crowded, and families come to meet. children are playing around and so on. So they learned for once out of mistakes. Now you will ask maybe how did they solve the traffic problem? So they made it quite clever. They decided that the roundabout was not, roundabout traffic would not be possible anymore. That means that you can only come from the north, make a half circle and continue toward south, or if you come from south, you can make half a circle and continue toward the north. So in this situation, the traffic problem has been solved, and the circle is again here. And what is important actually, not only that there are no traffic problems, but that the city of Tel Aviv could now show to its population that the main square, holding the Bauhaus architecture and the whole Bauhaus spirit is wonderful again. It is attractive, and people can identify with the idea that Tel Aviv is like a synonym for the White City, and the White City is a sort of a synonym for Dizengoff Circle, and that's an open space, a space where people live, where they enjoy, where they see the wonderful Bauhaus buildings around it. So slowly we come to the conclusions of this speech, and I would like to end with these 4 main points. I think we have here in the management of the heritage of the White City, of the modernist heritage, some important points we found out. One would be, first of all, that preservation can be done also in a city who is living, not only in a museum. Of course, this is much more difficult to make preservation in a city like Tel Aviv, where people are still living, they are going to work, they have their cars, they need schools, and so on. That's not the way that we just can preserve a city as it was in the 1930s. We have new ideas of and needs. So we think Tel Aviv is an example which can show that preservation is possible also in a city where life goes on. Then we think that's point number 2, that preservation laws cannot just be copied all over the world. What is right for St. Petersburg is not definitely right for Odessa, and this is not right maybe for Athens. And the same is what we have seen here in Tel Aviv. The preservation laws are not the same as one would expect probably in Europe, but they have to be adopted, I think, to the local situation. And that's not only here, but all over the world. Then we think, number 3, that still some international pressure can help, because if the local departments know that they are also viewed from abroad, they will implement, they will have more power and also explaining to the local public that there are some frames, international frames, which should be respected. And then we think, that's number 4, my last point, we think that the municipality and the state or the area or the public have to give also examples. They cannot only ask from private persons to preserve buildings, but they should also show that the municipality or the village or whatever, they also give their part and they also are interested in preservation. So thank you very much for staying with me, and this is the end of my presentation, and I hope you will get also a little bit of feeling for Tel Aviv, and maybe you come and make a tour by yourself and look at our white city. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое за лекцию. И у нас есть несколько вопросов. Сейчас, один момент. Как вы относитесь к книге Шарона Ротбарда «Белый город, черный город»?
Okay, I think not everybody knows the book, so I just want to say some words. This is a book who postulates that the officials neglected by purpose the southern part of Tel Aviv-Yafo, meaning the city, the original Arab city of Jaffa, and they made bigger efforts for developing the northern part of this cities, that means of Tel Aviv. And it's a very political statement by this author, and I think it's interesting to read it, but I don't agree with his postulates. I can add maybe why I don't think that by purpose the municipality of Tel Aviv neglects the southern part of, that means Jaffa. In contrary, I would say that today, if we go through Jaffa, there is a lot of preservation done, and infrastructure is done, and I think Jaffa will be one of the nicest Arabic cities we know, thanks to the investment of the city of Tel Aviv. Yes. Some more questions?
Да, еще один вопрос. Все передают привет в Тель-Авив. Благодарят за лекцию. Вопрос следующий. В какие годы проводилась реновация зданий по третьему типу? Например, здание архитектора Жени Вербуха.
The renovation process takes a long time. It started already, you can say, slowly 20 years ago. And but now it is enforced. If you come now to Tel Aviv, you will think that it's like an additional construction boom. All over, buildings are getting renovated, and so I suppose in another maybe 3 years, really quite a big part of the white city will be white again.
Ну, наверное, вы уже ответили на этот вопрос, потому что следующий был как раз вопрос, в каком состоянии сейчас дома. И, может быть, еще последний вопрос. Кто-то из московских конструктивистов участвовал ли в застройке Белого города? Может быть, вообще где-то есть какой-то русский след, скорее так можно переформулировать, наверное, этот вопрос.
Oh, I'm very glad that you asked this question, and that is what I said at the beginning. That was our idea in researching the subject of Hutemas and connection to Tel Aviv. And as I said, we did not find a direct connection, but we are sure that there must be at least ideological connections, and we are very, very much interested in this subject, and we hope that we can find answers, and maybe somebody who is listening now has a clue or knows more than we, so we would be more than glad to get more information, because of the fact actually that, for example, last year all over Europe the people were speaking about the centenary of the Bauhaus school in Germany, and here they were speaking about the influence of Bauhaus and Bauhaus and Bauhaus, but Hutemas was not so much mentioned. And so we think we have to correct, to find a historical mistake and to find the clues.
Спасибо. Ну и, наверное, последний самый вопрос. Как участвует ЮНЕСКО в сохранении и восстановлении Белого города? Я так понимаю, что это вопрос, как именно?
Mm-hmm. No, the UNESCO, they don't take part. They say actually it's already a big honor to be on the list of the UNESCO, and you have to behave according to the laws of UNESCO. And I think it's true. People are interested, for example, the tourists, they like to go to World Heritage Sites, which the UNESCO proclaimed. So, but in additional help, they don't give. That means they don't give money for the preservation.
Спасибо большое еще раз. Спасибо большое, доктор Миха Гросс. Переводила сегодняшний эфир Надежда Лебедева. Спасибо вам, Надежда, большое. Ну и спасибо большое всем зрителям. Всего хорошего.
Thank you very much, and hope to see all of you in Tel Aviv.